The moon bit the sun at half past noon, and every dragon in the valley of Soreth stopped singing. It happened all at once. One moment the air over the valley hummed with 1,000 overlapping voices, the deep bass drones of the elders perched on the southern cliffs, the bright harmonic trills of the yearlings circling the thermals above the ridge line, the slow, tide-like pulse of the brood mothers nesting in the cavern mouths along the eastern wall. The valley had not known silence in 400 years. Silence in dragon culture meant one of two things: a death or a listening. Something had arrived that required the attention of every living dragon simultaneously. Marin Dahl was the only human who noticed the silence before the darkness. She was 10 years old, standing barefoot on the observation ledge of the Envoy's Tower, the squat stone building, where the human delegation had been housed for the past 3 weeks, and she had been watching the eclipse through a pinhole card her father had made from a cargo manifest. The shadow crossed the card in miniature, a neat dark circle eating a bright one, and she was counting the seconds of totality when the hum vanished from the air like a held breath released. Not faded, stopped, like a hand pressed flat over 1,000 mouths at once. She lowered the card. The valley stretched below her, a broad granite bowl ringed by mountains, every surface carved or shaped by centuries of draconic habitation. Ledges and roosts and landing platforms climbed the cliff walls in terraced rows. Bridges of fused stone spanned the gaps between peaks, and on every visible surface dragons, hundreds of them, some as small as horses, some as large as galleons, their scales catching the strange copper light of the eclipsed sun in colors that shifted and pooled like oil on water: deep green, slate blue, burnt gold, iron black, pearl white, all of them still, all of them facing the same direction. Down, toward the valley floor, toward the sealed chamber carved into the bedrock beneath the hearth stone, the flat-topped granite monolith at the valley's center, where the council fires had burned since before humans had a word for dragon. "Dad," Marin said. She didn't turn around. "Dad, something's wrong." Brendal was the human delegation's chief translator. He was also a widower, a former dockworker from the coastal city of Thresk, and the man who had spent 7 years learning enough of the Soreth tonal language to be trusted as the first human envoy in a century. He was currently asleep in a camp chair behind her, his boots off and his translation journal open on his chest, because the eclipse was supposed to be ceremonial, a day of singing, not diplomacy. He was on his feet before she finished the sentence. Bren had learned to trust his daughter's observations the way a navigator trusts a compass. Marin noticed things, not the way scholars notice things with categories and instruments and theories, the way water notices a crack in stone. Without effort, without agenda. "The singing stopped," he said. "It wasn't a question." All of it at the same time. Bren moved to the ledge beside her and looked down. The dragons on the nearest cliff face a roosting cluster of mid-sized blues and greens. The ones the delegation called the Terrace Pack were motionless. Their wings were folded. Their heads were low. Their eyes, which normally cycled through shades of amber and copper in conversation, were all locked to the same dull gold, fixed on the valley floor. "That's a morning posture," Bren said quietly. He picked up his journal and flipped to a page near the back, a sketch of draconic body language he'd been refining for years. Head low, wings folded, eyes gold-locked. It's grief. Or anticipation of grief. Something's dying. Something's waking. The word landed between them with a weight that didn't match its size. Bren closed the journal. He looked at his daughter barefoot, sunburned, her dark hair cut short because she kept getting it caught in the observation scope, and he made a decision that he would spend the rest of his life defending. "Get your boots on," he said. "We're going down." The path from the Envoy's Tower to the valley floor was a switchback carved into the cliff face, wide enough for 2 humans walking abreast or 1 medium-sized dragon moving carefully. They passed 3 roosting ledges on the way down, and on each one the dragons did not move, did not blink, did not acknowledge them. The air smelled of hot stone and ozone, and something older, a mineral tang, like the breath of a deep cave, rising from below. At the base of the cliff, the delegation's security attaché, a sharp-jawed woman named Soria Ketch, intercepted them. "Envoy Dahl, we need to get back inside. The dragons are." "Listening," Bren said. "Not threatening, there's a difference. The distinction isn't reassuring when there are 1,000 of them and 6 of us. Marin's coming with me to the hearthstone." Ketch looked at the child, then at Bren, and her expression said everything her training told her not to say out loud. "The council hasn't authorized." "The council isn't meeting today. It's an eclipse day, ceremonial. Whatever's happening at the hearthstone, it's not political." He paused, and Marin heard something none of us did. This was not entirely accurate. Marin hadn't heard something. She'd felt it, a vibration in her chest below the frequency of hearing that had started the moment the singing stopped. She hadn't told her father about it because she didn't have words for it yet. It wasn't pain. It wasn't pressure. It was closer to the feeling she got when she stood at the edge of the dock in Thresk and watched the tide come, in the sense of something vast approaching, patient and inevitable, taking its time because time was a thing it owned. They reached the hearthstone in 7 minutes. The monolith rose from the valley floor like a fist of dark granite, 30 meters high, its surface carved with symbols that Bren had spent 3 years cataloging and could only partially read. At its base, a set of stairs descended into the bedrock. The stairs were older than the carvings, older than the valley's current inhabitants. They had been carved by the first generation of Sarath dragons, the ones the elders called the Root Singers, who had shaped the valley with resonance before the concept of tools existed. 2 dragons flanked the stairway entrance. They were Covenant guards, massive iron-black females with scarred flanks and eyes that burned a steady amber, each one large enough to swallow the envoy's tower whole. They did not move as Bren and Marin approached, but their eyes tracked the humans with the focused intensity of creatures that were restraining themselves from something. Bren stopped 10 paces away. He pressed his right fist to his sternum, the Sarath greeting that meant, "I carry no fire," and waited. The guard on the left exhaled, a low-shaped breath that carried a single tonal phrase. Bren translated it in his head. "You are not called." "I know," he said, in Sarath. His pronunciation was imperfect. The human throat couldn't produce the sub-bass harmonics that gave the language its emotional layer, but his grammar was clean. "My daughter felt the waking. She would like to listen." The guard's eyes shifted to Marin. The amber deepened, cycling through copper to a dark bronze that Bren had never seen in 3 weeks of study. It was not hostility. It was assessment. The dragon was reading the child the way a jeweler reads a stone, looking for flaws, for fractures, for the internal structure that determined whether the thing in front of her was what it appeared to be. Marin did not flinch. She stood with her hands at her sides, barefoot on the warm stone, and met the dragon's gaze with the unself-conscious directness of a child who had not yet learned that some things were supposed to be frightening. The guard exhaled again, a different phrase this time, lower, slower, with an undertone that Bren couldn't parse. He caught the main meaning, permitted, but the harmonic underneath it carried something else, something that sounded almost like surprise. The second guard shifted her head toward the first. A rapid exchange passed between them, tonal and subvocal, too fast and too low for Bren to follow. He caught one fragment. "The root stirs for this, for a hatchling of the soft skins." The first guard's response was a single sustained correction note. The second guard went still, but her eyes stayed on Marin as they passed between the 2 enormous bodies, and the look in them was not hostility, but something harder to dismiss, genuine uncertainty about what was about to happen. They descended. The stairs went deep. 50 steps, 100, the air cooling and the stone walls narrowing until the passage was barely wide enough for Bren's shoulders. The eclipse light faded above them, replaced by a blue-green luminescence that came from the walls themselves, bioluminescent lichen that the dragons had cultivated in the deep places for millennia, feeding on the thermal energy that rose from below. The vibration Marin felt in her chest grew stronger with each step, developing texture, like a sound resolving from noise into music as you walked toward its source. At step 80, the air temperature changed, not gradually a threshold. The warmth of the valley's surface gave way to something deeper, a radiant heat that came from the stone itself, and Marin understood for the first time that the valley wasn't warm because of the sun. It was warm because something underneath it was alive. Bren felt it too. He pressed his palm to the wall and the stone was hot, not scalding, but the steady warmth of a body, of a thing with circulation and metabolism. He'd read about it in the old texts, the claim that the valley's thermal system was biological rather than geological, but he'd classified it as mythology. Standing 80 steps underground with his hand on a breathing wall, he reclassified it. "Dad," Marin said. She had stopped walking. She was staring at the wall beside her, where the bioluminescent lichen had changed color, shifting from blue-green to a deep, pulsing amber that moved in waves, radiating downward, toward whatever lay below. The waves matched the rhythm of the vibration in her chest. The heartbeat and the light were the same system. "I can feel it in the wall," she said. "The song, it's louder here. It's right here in the stone." Bren knelt beside her and put his ear to the wall. He heard nothing. His ears were not tuned to these frequencies. But through his knees, through the bones of his legs, through the flats of his palms, he could feel the faintest tremor. Not an earthquake, a pulse. Slow and vast and patient, like the respiration of something for which a single breath lasted minutes. "That's the heartbeat," he said, "the Deep Mother's heartbeat." They looked at each other in the amber-lit passage, father and daughter, translator and listener. The man who spent 7 years learning to speak to dragons and the girl who didn't need to learn because her body already knew the frequency. And then Marin turned and continued walking downward, and Bren followed. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened into a vault. The word was inadequate. It was a cathedral carved from living rock, its ceiling lost in darkness above, its walls smooth and curved like the inside of a bell. The floor was obsidian, volcanic glass, black and reflective, polished by centuries of draconic movement until it mirrored the invisible ceiling. And in the center of the vault, curled on a raised platform of the same obsidian, was the largest dragon Marin had ever seen. She had been in the valley for 3 weeks. She had seen the elders, the ancient blues and golds who governed the council, each one the size of a 2-story building. She had seen the grand matriarch Valeth, whose wingspan shadowed the entire hearthstone when she landed. She had thought those were the largest creatures in the world. She had been wrong by an order of magnitude. The dragon on the platform was not merely large. It was geological. Its body filled the vault the way a river fills its bed completely, inevitably, as though the chamber had been carved around it rather than it having entered the chamber. Its scales were the color of deep water, not blue, not green, but the shade the ocean turns at its greatest depths, where light gives up and pressure takes over. Each scale was the size of Marin's torso. The claws, half-curled, were longer than her entire body. The tail wound around the platform's base twice and still had length to spare, its tip disappearing into a channel carved in the vault floor. Its eyes were closed. An old dragon stood at the edge of the platform, smaller than the sleeper, silver-white, with translucent scales that showed the blue-violet glow of veins beneath. Marin recognized her, Iri Sarath Ken, the keeper of the root song. She was the oldest dragon Marin had met in the valley, ancient enough that her horns had begun to crystallize at the tips, turning from bone to something closer to quartz. She had been at every council session the delegation attended, always in the back, always watching, saying nothing. She was not saying nothing now. Her silver-white body was positioned between the platform and the entrance, her wings partially spread, and the posture was one Bryn recognized from his body language studies. Threshold guard. She was deciding whether to let them approach. Two other dragons stood along the vault walls, younger Covenant members, deep gray, their eyes fixed on the sleeper with the unblinking focus of sentries who understood that what they guarded was not property but possibility. One of them tracked Marin's movement into the vault with a slow turn of the head, and the subvocal note it produced was a question. This one. Eri answered with a single exhaled tone. Yes, this one. She looked at Bryn and Marin without surprise. She had been expecting them, or expecting someone. Envoy, she said, in the formal register of Sarath. Her voice was a bass rumble that the vault walls amplified into something almost orchestral. The Deep Mother stirs. Bryn's throat went dry. He had heard the name, every translator had. The Deep Mother, the oldest living Sarath, the one who had slept beneath the hearthstone since before the valley had a name, whose heartbeat powered the thermal vents that kept the valley warm through winter, whose dreams, according to the old songs, shaped the resonance that held the colony together. She was not a ruler. She was not a god. She was a foundation, the bedrock the entire civilization rested on. And she had not been conscious in 600 years. Every eclipse the colony listened for her voice. Every eclipse the answer was silence. The Covenant maintained the vault. The elders sang the fragments they remembered. But each generation the root song degraded further, and each eclipse, the silence after the listening grew heavier with the weight of what was being lost. Why now? Bryn asked. The eclipse, Eri said. The alignment of sun and moon and the valley's position, it creates a harmonic convergence that reaches the deep places. Every eclipse we listen. Every eclipse she stirs but does not wake. The singing stops because the colony is listening for her voice. For 6 centuries, the answer has been silence. And today she moved. Eri's crystalline horns caught the bioluminescent light and scattered it in pale rainbows across the vault ceiling. Not much, a claw, an eyelid, but more than she has moved in 300 years. The elders believe she is trying to surface from whatever depth she has sunk to, but she cannot do it alone. The root song, the resonance that connects her to the colony, has degraded. 6 centuries of disuse. The younger generations cannot produce the frequencies. The elders can, but they are too few, and their voices are fading. What do you need? Eri looked at Marin, not at Bryn, at the child. A human voice, Eri said, carries frequencies that no dragon throat can produce. The upper harmonics, the overtones above our range. In the old texts, the ones that predate human-dragon contact by 1,000 years, the root song was described as incomplete, a chord missing its highest note. The Deep Mother composed the song for voices that did not yet exist. She paused. We believe she composed it for yours. The silence that followed was not silence. It was the sound of the vault breathing the slow, deep exhalation of the sleeping dragon. Each breath a wind that stirred the bioluminescent lichen and made the obsidian floor vibrate beneath their feet. Bryn looked at his daughter. Marin looked at the dragon. What do I have to do? Marin asked. Listen, Eri said. The Deep Mother's heartbeat carries the root song. It is faint, damaged, fragmented, like a melody played through a wall. If you can hear it, you may be able to answer it, to fill in the missing note. And if I can't? Then she sleeps, and the root song continues to degrade, and within a generation, perhaps 2, the harmonic foundation that holds this valley together will fail. The thermal vents will cool. The resonance will scatter. The colony will fragment. Eri's voice was steady, but her claws scraped the obsidian. We will not die, but we will lose what makes us a people. Marin sat down on the obsidian floor. She crossed her legs. She pressed her palms flat against the stone and closed her eyes. The vibration was there immediately stronger here than anywhere else, a pulse that came up through the floor and through her hands and settled in the center of her chest. It was the heartbeat, vast and slow, each beat separated by seconds, each one carrying a shape that was more than rhythm. A melody lived inside it, broken and scattered, like shards of a stained glass window that had shattered and been swept into a pile. She could hear the pieces. Not with her ears, with something deeper, the same faculty that let her feel the tide in Thresk, the same sense that told her when a storm was 3 days out by the way the gulls changed their flight patterns. The melody was there, buried under 6 centuries of silence and decay. It was asking for something. She hummed. The sound that came out of her was small, thin. A 10-year-old girl humming a note on the floor of a vault older than civilization, and the note was nothing, a wisp, a thread, a single vibration from a single human throat against the geological mass of a sleeping dragon. Nothing happened. The heartbeat continued its vast, slow rhythm. The bioluminescent walls pulsed. Iri watched without expression, but Bren saw her claws tighten against the obsidian. Maren adjusted. She tilted the pitch up, searching, the way you turn a dial on a radio trying to find a station buried in static. Too high, too bright. The fragments scattered further. She brought it back down lower into the range where her voice wanted to crack, where the note lived more in her chest than in her throat. There, the fragments trembled. One of them, a single shard of the broken melody, rotated toward her like a compass needle swinging to north. She held the note. Her lungs burned. She breathed through her nose without breaking the hum, a trick her mother had taught her years ago, singing dock shanties on the morning watch, and the shard aligned, locked into place. The vibration in her chest shifted from chaos to pattern, her voice and the heartbeat forming a single sustained chord that was richer than either one alone. The Deep Mother's heartbeat stuttered, not painfully, the way a sleeper's breathing changes when a dream shifts from deep to shallow. A catch, a recognition. Maren hummed louder. A second shard aligned. A third. Each one sent a pulse of resonance through the floor that she felt in her kneecaps, in her jaw, in the fillings of her back teeth. It wasn't comfortable. It was like standing inside a bell while someone struck it. The sound lived in her body, and her body was not designed for it. Her nose started bleeding, a thin line of red running over her lip and onto her chin. She didn't notice. Bren did. He stepped forward, and Iri blocked him with one outstretched wing gently, but without negotiation. "If she stops now," Iri said, "the fragments will scatter. They will not align again for another eclipse cycle, 31 years. She's bleeding. She is resonating at a frequency her body has never carried. It is strain, not damage. The blood will stop when the song stabilizes." Bren looked at his daughter. Her eyes were closed. Her palms were flat on the obsidian. Blood traced a line down her chin and dripped onto the black glass floor, where it caught the bioluminescent light and glowed faintly, as though even her blood was trying to match the frequency. He stayed where he was. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, including burying his wife. A fourth shard aligned. A fifth. The root song was assembling itself around Maren's voice like a crystal forming around a seed, not all at once, but layer by layer, each new fragment adding depth and complexity to the chord. The vault walls began to resonate. The bioluminescent lichen pulsed in time with the heartbeat. The air thickened with harmonics that Bren could feel but not hear, frequencies below and above his range that pressed against his eardrums and made his vision swim. On the platform, the Deep Mother's claw moved. Not a twitch, a deliberate contraction, the talons scraping obsidian with a sound like a bow drawn across the lowest string of an instrument the size of a building. The noise should have been terrifying. To Maren, it sounded like an answer. A sixth shard, a seventh. The nosebleed stopped. Maren's voice steadied, strengthened, found a resonance that felt less like strain and more like settling the moment when a broken bone knits and the ache becomes a hum. The eighth shard was the hardest. It carried the heaviest frequency, the sub-bass foundation of the root song, the part that connected the Deep Mother's heartbeat to the thermal system beneath the valley. When it aligned, the vault floor cracked. A single fissure ran from the platform to the nearest wall, and through it rose a pulse of heat that smelled of the Earth's interior sulfur and iron and the mineral breath of magma chambers miles below. Marin's voice wavered. The weight of the frequency threatened to pull her note down into ranges her human throat could not sustain. She felt the cord straining, felt the shards trembling at the edge of dissolution, and she did the only thing she could think of. She thought of her mother, the dock shanties, the way her mother's voice had always found the next note without searching for it, as though the melody already existed and she was just revealing it one phrase at a time. Marin didn't try to hold the impossible bass note. She let it go and climbed, pitched her voice up into the bright overtone above the chord, the harmonic that no dragon could produce, and the song restructured itself around the new anchor point. The 9th shard snapped into place. The 10th. The vault rang like a struck bell, every surface vibrating, the obsidian floor humming with a tone that Marin felt in the marrow of her bones. Marin didn't stop. She hummed, and the root song reassembled itself around her voice piece by piece, shard by shard, each fragment finding its place in the chord as her note gave it something to orient toward. She wasn't composing. She wasn't performing. She was providing a reference pitch, the way a tuning fork gives an orchestra its A, everything else organized around it. Erie's breath caught. "Continue," the old dragon whispered. The 2 gray Covenant sentries along the vault walls had shifted. They were no longer watching the sleeper. They were watching Marin. One of them had lowered its head to the floor, pressing its jaw against the obsidian, and through the stone it was feeling what Bren could not hear, the full harmonic structure of the root song reassembling, frequency by frequency, around a human child's voice. The sentry's eyes were wide, not with fear, with the specific, overwhelming recognition of a creature witnessing something it had been taught was impossible. The Deep Mother's eyes opened. Not all at once. The left eye first, a slit of amber in the deep water scales, catching the bioluminescent light and reflecting it back with an intensity that turned the vault from dim to bright. Then the right, and the amber was not the warm gold of the younger dragons. It was old amber, the color of fossilized resin, deep and layered, with inclusions and striations that spoke of centuries of accumulated light. Eyes that had watched species rise and fall. Eyes that had last seen the world when the mountains outside were 200 meters shorter and the valley was a river. The eyes found Marin. The child did not stop humming. She looked into those amber depths and felt the vertigo of standing at the edge of something ancient, the same dizzy wonder she felt when she leaned over the dock in Thresk and looked down into water so deep the bottom was a rumor. But she did not pull back. She held the note, held the gaze, and felt the root song completing itself around her like a house being built from the rafters down. The Deep Mother exhaled. The breath filled the vault like a warm wind from the center of the earth. It smelled of deep stone, of mineral springs, of the primordial heat that existed before the mountains formed. It carried sound, not a word, not a roar, but a note. The lowest note Marin had ever felt, so deep it was more vibration than tone, and it harmonized with her hum the way a cathedral organ harmonizes with a penny whistle. 2 sounds that should have been absurd together, and instead were perfect. The Deep Mother spoke, not in Sarath, not in any language Marin knew. In something older, simpler, a shaped breath, a tonal phrase that bypassed grammar entirely and delivered meaning directly, the way music delivers emotion without needing words. The meaning was clear to everyone in the vault. "You are the note I wrote 600 years ago, for a voice that had not yet been born." Bren's knees buckled. He caught himself on the vault wall, his translator's journal pressed to his chest, his face showing the expression of a man who has spent 7 years learning to speak to dragons and has just discovered that the deepest communication doesn't involve speaking at all. Irie lowered herself to the obsidian, not a bow, but the draconic posture of profound recognition, chest to the ground, throat exposed. "I see what you are. I remember." The ascent took hours. Not because of distance, but because the Deep Mother had to relearn the shape of her own body, and the vault that had contained her sleep could not contain her waking. She moved up through the bedrock the way she had once moved down into it, by resonance. The stone parted for her. Not violently, there was no explosion, no earthquake. The rock flowed. It rearranged itself around her ascending body the way water rearranges itself around a rising swimmer, because the Deep Mother and the bedrock were part of the same system, and her heartbeat was the instruction set that told the stone where to be. The process was not painless. As the Deep Mother moved, the root song still fragile, still newly assembled around Marin's voice strained under the load. Each meter of ascent required the cord to carry more weight, more resonance, more of the dragon's consciousness. Marin felt it in her throat, a tightness, a heat, the sensation of her voice being drawn upon like a well being pumped. She hummed harder, not louder, harder, putting more of herself into the note, more of the attention that Eri had described, the sustained act of listening without agenda. Bren watched her face change. The effort was visible now, not physical strain, but the deeper exhaustion of a consciousness holding open a door that wants to close. Her eyes were bright and fixed on the dragon's foreleg, and her jaw was set with the quiet stubbornness that Bren recognized from her mother, the expression that said, "I am doing this, and I will finish it, and you can help or you can get out of the way." Halfway up, the song stabilized, the weight redistributed. The fragments that had been wavering locked into permanent positions, and the root song shifted from something Marin was holding together by force of will into something that was holding itself together, with her voice as the keystone. The difference was subtle but total, like the moment when a kite catches the wind and the string goes from dragging to taut, and you realize you're not holding it up anymore. It's flying. Marin walked beside the Deep Mother. Not ahead, not behind. Beside. The child's hand rested on the Deep Mother's foreleg as they climbed, her fingers tracing the seams between scales the size of dinner plates, and the dragon adjusted her pace to the child's stride without being asked. A creature that could have moved mountains was matching the gait of a 10-year-old girl, and the gentleness of it was the most powerful thing in the valley. Bren followed 3 steps behind, writing nothing, saying nothing, doing the hardest thing a translator could do, witnessing without interpreting. Above them, the bedrock shifted. The Covenant guards at the stairway entrance felt at first a deep tremor, not seismic but resonant, the stone humming with a frequency that had been absent for 6 centuries. The first guard looked at the second. The second's earlier skepticism was gone. Her amber eyes were wide, and the sound she made a single low note, involuntary, pulled from her throat by the resonance passing through the stone, was the Sorath word for foundation. At the envoy's tower, Ketch grabbed the door frame as the ledge vibrated beneath her feet. Tallies, the behavioral observer, had his telescope trained on the hearthstone and was narrating in a rapid, breathless monotone that had abandoned scientific detachment entirely. The stone is moving. The monolith, the surface is cracking, not fracturing, opening like a shell, like something is coming up from underneath. Ketch pulled the telescope from his hands and looked. The carvings on the hearthstone's surface were shifting. The symbols Bren had spent 3 years cataloging were rearranging themselves, the grooves widening, the lines deepening, the entire surface of the monolith restructuring to accommodate something rising from below. It was not destruction. It was articulation. The stone was becoming readable for the first time in centuries, the carvings revealing their true shapes as the resonance that had carved them returned. "Get me a line to the crown relay," Ketch said. "What do I tell them?" She didn't have an answer. What do you tell a government when the geological foundation of an allied territory turns out to be a sleeping dragon, and a child just woke it up? There was no field manual for this. "Tell them to send a diplomat," she said. "Not a general, not a scholar, a diplomat, someone who knows how to listen." They emerged from the base of the hearthstone into the light of the uneclipsed sun. The eclipse had passed while they were underground. The full noon sun blazed over the valley, and the light was so ordinary, so unremarkable, so plainly itself that it felt sacred in the way that only ordinary things can feel when something extraordinary is happening beside them. A bird crossed the sky above the hearthstone. A thermal lifted a dust devil from the valley floor. The mundane world continued, and the dragon rose through it. The Deep Mother's head rose above the monolith, first horns catching the sun, deep-water scales flashing with iridescence that the bioluminescent vault had only hinted at, every surface suddenly alive with color. Deep blue shifting to green, shifting to amber, shifting to gold. The scales, a living spectrum that changed with the angle of the light. Then the neck, thick as a temple column, the muscles beneath the scales rippling with the slow, deliberate movements of a creature relearning the weight of itself. Then the shoulders, each one wider than the envoy's tower, displacing stone with the patient authority of a river changing its course. Then the wings, still partially furled, the membrane catching daylight and turning translucent gold, veined with patterns that pulsed with the heartbeat, the same heartbeat that had warmed the valley for 1,000 years, now visible on the surface, legible, undeniable. Every dragon in the valley was watching. 1,000 dragons, perched on every cliff and ledge and bridge and roost, silent, still, their eyes locked on the Deep Mother with an intensity that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. They knew what she was. They had heard her heartbeat through the stone their entire lives. They had sung to her every eclipse and received silence in return. And now she was here, standing in daylight, alive, awake, with a human child's hand on her foreleg. The silence held for 9 heartbeats. Bren counted. It was the translator's instinct. When you don't know what to say, you measure the silence and wait for someone else to fill it. On the eastern cliffs, a brood mother, a rust-red female with 3 hatchlings pressed against her flank, lowered her head until her jaw touched the stone ledge. The hatchlings followed, mimicking the posture with the imperfect coordination of creatures who had never performed it but knew it in their bones. On the western face, a cluster of adolescent blues unfurled their wings in unison, and held them open, a display Bren had never seen, wings spread wide like open hands, the membrane taut and catching the sun. It was not threat, it was presentation, showing the Deep Mother that they were whole, that they had endured her absence and remained. An elder on the southern cliffs, a massive gold-bronze dragon with a cracked horn and 1 clouded eye, the one the delegation called Old Tessara, produced a sound. Not a word, a tone, a single sustained bass note that vibrated through the cliff face and into the valley floor and up through the hearthstone's granite. Other elders answered. 3, then 5, then 9, each one adding a note to the chord, building the harmonic foundation the way masons lay the first course of a wall. But the chord was incomplete, missing its capstone, missing the voice that had held it together for 1,000 years before the long silence. The Grand Matriarch Valeth was the first to move. She launched from the southern cliffs a dragon the size of a warship, gold and bronze, her scarred wings beating the air with a sound like distant drums, and she flew to the hearthstone and landed on the monolith's flat summit with a precision that belied her size. She folded her wings. She lowered her body to the stone. She pressed her chest to the granite and extended her neck until her head hung over the edge, looking down at the Deep Mother and the child with eyes that had gone from amber to a luminous, liquid gold. She sang 1 note, low, sustained, reverent, the Sarath word for awake. The Terrace Pack answered, then the yearlings, then the brood mothers. Then the elders, one by one, each voice joining the chord until the valley sang with the full root song for the first time in 6 centuries. A living, breathing architecture of sound that climbed the cliff walls and resonated in the mountain peaks, and carried across the ranges to valleys that hadn't heard the Sarath singing in living memory. Marin stood in the center of it. The sound moved through her the way it had in the vault, and she hummed her note, and the note was small and human and exactly sufficient. She was not a hero. She was not a chosen one. She was a child who had listened when everyone else was too busy to hear, who had answered when no one else had the right frequency, and who was now standing barefoot on warm stone in full sunlight, while a civilization remembered what it sounded like when its foundation was awake. The Deep Mother's head turned slowly across the valley, taking in the singing colony, the 1,000 dragons she had last heard as hatchlings and yearlings, now grown into elders and matriarchs, still carrying the remnants of the song she had taught their ancestors. The amber eyes moved from face to face, ledge to ledge, cliff to cliff, and with each gaze the dragon being gazed upon sang louder. Recognition. The foundation seeing what had grown from it while it slept and approving. On the eastern terraces, a brood mother named Koreth, the rustred female who had lowered her head first, produced a sound that made Eri go still. A cradle tone. The sound a dragon makes when presenting its young to an elder for naming. Koreth's 3 hatchlings, each one small enough to sit in Marin's lap, scrambled forward on the ledge, tumbling over each other, and their small voices, high, bright, wavering, joined the root song for the first time. The notes were wrong. Off-key, off-tempo, more enthusiasm than accuracy. But the Deep Mother's eyes found them, and the amber warmed, and the hatchling's mother tucked her wings tighter and pressed her jaw to the stone, and the gesture meant, "These are mine, and they are singing your song, and I am grateful that they have a song to sing." One by one, the brood mothers on the eastern wall repeated it, each one presenting her young, each clutch of hatchlings adding their voices, messy, chaotic, beautiful in the way that only new voices can be beautiful, because they carry no history and no fear, only the raw impulse to join the sound and be part of it. The root song had been composed for a complete choir. For 600 years, it had been sung by a diminishing ensemble, each generation losing another voice, another frequency, another layer of the chord. Now, in the space of an hour, the choir was rebuilding itself from the bottom up, the youngest voices, filling in the gaps that the elders could no longer reach, the Deep Mother's bass anchoring the foundation, and Marin's human hum threading through all of it, the overtone that connected every register. Bren, watching from the base of the hearth stone, felt tears on his face. He didn't wipe them. He was a translator, and this was the first time in 7 years that the Sarath had communicated something he understood perfectly without needing to translate a single word. The delegation's security attaché found them an hour later. Ketch had spent the emergence in a state of controlled panic, receiving increasingly incoherent reports from the delegation's remaining staff tallies. The behavioral observer had abandoned his telescope and was sitting on the envoy's tower floor repeating, unprecedented, to no one in particular. And when she arrived at the hearthstone and saw the Deep Mother, fully emerged, the size of a geological feature, her tail curling around the base of the monolith, Ketch stopped walking and did something she had never done in 15 years of security work. She sat down. Not a collapse, not a faint. A deliberate decision to sit on the ground, because standing felt like an inadequate response to what she was seeing, and kneeling felt presumptuous, and sitting was the only posture that honestly expressed the specific combination of terror and wonder and professional uselessness that she was experiencing. "Envoy Dahl," she said from the ground, "I need to file a report." "What are you going to say?" "I have no idea. The delegation's youngest member woke a geological dragon by humming. Doesn't fit any of my report templates." Bren almost smiled. "Tell them the truth. A child did what 7 years of diplomacy couldn't. Tell them the Sarath root song requires a human voice to complete it. Tell them the alliance we came here to negotiate was already written, 600 years ago, by a dragon who composed a melody with a note only a human throat can produce. She's 10. She's the note, that's what Eri called her. Not a voice keeper, not a writer, not an ambassador. The note, the frequency that completes the chord. And what does that mean for the delegation, for the treaty negotiations?" Bren looked at his daughter. Marin was sitting cross-legged on the stone, leaning against the Deep Mother's foreleg, her eyes half closed, humming absently. The dragon's head was lowered, her enormous amber eye focused on the girl with the patient, settled expression of a creature that has found the thing it was waiting for. "It means the treaty doesn't matter," Bren said. "It never mattered. The dragons don't think in treaties. They think in harmonics. And right now, the harmonic says a human child is the anchor of their civilization's foundation song. That's not an alliance you negotiate. It's one you live." Ketch processed this. Her training told her to find the angle, the leverage, the strategic implication. Her eyes, watching the child and the dragon below, told her something different. The crown is going to have trouble with that. The crown is going to have trouble with a lot of things. Bren sat down on the stone beside Ketch. They were both on the ground now, the envoy and the security officer, sitting in the dust at the base of the hearthstone like two spectators at a performance that had rendered all their professional categories meaningless. "We came here to negotiate an alliance between the crown and the Sarath Council. Instead, a dragon composed a song for us 6 centuries before we arrived, and my daughter finished it by humming. That's not a diplomatic outcome. It's a cosmological one. And what do I put in the report? 3 sentences. The root song requires a human voice to complete it. The Deep Mother chose a child. Recommend we listen. That's it. That's everything." Around them the valley sang. The sun moved across the sky. The thermal vents, which had been weakening for decades according to the delegation's geological surveys, surged. The hot springs at the valley's northern edge, which had been tepid when the delegation arrived 3 weeks ago, steamed. The ground temperature rose 2 degrees in an hour. The air smelled of mineral warmth and deep stone and the ozone tang of dragonfire that was not destructive but generative, the heat that kept the valley alive through every winter for 1,000 years, powered by one heartbeat. The crown's response arrived before the formal acknowledgement. A rider reached the valley's northern pass on the second morning, carrying a sealed dispatch tube and the expression of a man who had ridden through the night and wished he hadn't. The dispatch was addressed to Envoy Dahl. It contained 2 pages. The first was a formal inquiry from the Crown's Office of Strategic Assets, requesting a full inventory of the awakened entity's capabilities, territorial claims, and potential military applications. The second was a personal note from the Lord Chancellor. Contain the situation. Classify everything. Send the child home. Bren read both pages twice. Then he folded them, placed them in the cookfire, and watched them burn. "That's a Crown directive," Ketch said. She had read it over his shoulder. "It's a directive written by someone who thinks a 600-year-old dragon is a strategic asset. The Deep Mother is not a thing to be contained. She's the reason this valley exists." He poked the ashes with a stick. "The Crown can send a diplomat who understands that, or they can send no one. Those are the options." Ketch was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "For the record, I agree with you. But the record also notes that you just burned a direct order from the Lord Chancellor." "The record can note whatever it likes." Ketch studied him, the former dockworker from Thresk, who had somehow become the voice of a diplomatic mission to the oldest civilization on the continent, and who was now committing career suicide with the casual confidence of a man who had found something more important than a career. "I'll draft a response," she said, "something more diplomatic than arson." The formal acknowledgement came the following morning. The Valley Council, the 7 eldest dragons, including Valeth and Iri, gathered at the hearthstone at dawn. The Deep Mother was there, fully awake, her body arranged around the monolith's base with the careful precision of a creature that understood the symbolic weight of its own posture. They summoned Marin, not Bren, not Ketch, not the delegation, Marin alone. Bren watched from the envoy's tower ledge, his hands gripping the stone railing, his translator's journal open but his pen still. Ketch stood behind him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She had sent Sarath Maul's report to the Crown 3 days ago. She had received no reply, which she chose to interpret as approval. Tally's was on the opposite ledge, sketching furiously, filling his fifth notebook since the waking. He had stopped trying to classify the behavior he was observing and had started simply drawing it, the postures, the expressions, the quality of the light in the amber eyes. His drawings were better than his reports. Bren could hear the Sarath phrases, the formal register, the deep sub-bass harmonics that carried ceremonial weight, but he couldn't follow the full meaning at this distance. He could see his daughter, tiny against the scale of the assembled dragons, standing barefoot on the obsidian slab in front of the Deep Mother. Valeth spoke first. The Grand Matriarch's voice carried across the valley a formal declaration in the oldest register of Sarath, the one that predated the current council system by 1,000 years. Bren caught fragments, root bond, voice sanker, the one who completes. The other elders responded in sequence, each one producing a sustained tone that Bren recognized as a ratification chord, the Sarath equivalent of a unanimous vote. 7 voices, 7 tones, all harmonizing. Then the Deep Mother spoke. Her voice was the lowest sound in the valley. It was not loud, it didn't need to be. It resonated through the bedrock, through the cliff walls, through the soles of Bren's feet on the Envoy's tower ledge, through the bones of every creature in the valley. It was a single phrase, 4 tones, and even at this distance, even with his imperfect ear, Bren understood it. The phrase was, she was always part of the song. Marin reached up. The Deep Mother lowered her head. The child's palm pressed against the dragon's snout, a gesture so small against the scale of the creature that it should have looked absurd. It didn't. It looked like the most important thing happening anywhere in the world because it was. The Deep Mother's eye, the great amber lens, older than the mountains, caught the light, and the amber shifted, warmed, brightened by 1 degree, the way a lamp brightens when someone turns up the wick. And the sound the Deep Mother made, a low, resonant rumble that shook dust from the Envoy's tower ceiling and made the hot springs bubble, was unmistakable. It was laughter. A creature that had slept through the rise and fall of empires, that had dreamed in geological time, that had composed a melody for a species that did not yet exist, was laughing because a 10-year-old girl's palm on its snout tickled. Bren's vision blurred. He had to look away for a moment because the feeling in his chest was too large for looking. When he looked back, his daughter was laughing too. Openly, without performance, the sound ringing off the cliff walls and mixing with the root song in a way that was not discordant but complementary. A human laugh inside a draconic chord. An overtone the song had been missing. Around the valley, the singing changed. The formal ceremonial register softened, loosened, warmed. A yearling on the western cliff produced a sound that was unmistakably a giggle. An elder coughed. A brood mother snorted. An old Tessara, the cracked-horned gold with the clouded eye, produced a noise so unexpected that every dragon within earshot turned to look. A long, creaking trill, rusty with disuse, that was the draconic equivalent of an old man's wheeze laugh. The valley, for the first time in 600 years, sounded alive. Not ceremonial, not ritual, not performing the memory of what it had once been. Alive, in the messy, imperfect, human-inflected way that living things are alive when they stop curating their own image and simply exist. In the weeks that followed, the valley settled into a rhythm that no one had planned and no protocol could have predicted. The changes came in layers, physical first, then acoustic, then behavioral, each one building on the last, each one making the valley more fully itself than it had been in centuries. The thermal vents doubled their output within 2 days. Hot springs that had been cooling for decades surged back to their historical temperatures. The aquifers beneath the eastern terraces, which the delegation's geologist had flagged as declining, refilled overnight. Steam rose from fissures in the cliff face that hadn't vented in living memory. The valley was warming from the inside out. the Deep Mother's heartbeat driving a system that had been running on residual heat for centuries and was now fully powered again. The resonance changed the acoustics of the valley itself. Sounds carried differently. Voices were clearer. The wind, channeled through the carved peaks and bridges, produced harmonics that had been silent for 6 centuries. Ghost notes, the dragons called them, the ambient music of a valley designed to amplify the song of its inhabitants. Bren noticed it first in his translation work. Soreth phrases that had always sounded flat and approximate through human ears suddenly had depth and nuance. The valley was teaching him the language his textbooks couldn't. The dragon's behavior shifted in ways that Tallies documented with increasing wonder and decreasing objectivity. The yearlings, who had been skittish around the human delegation since their arrival, began roosting closer to the envoy's tower. A young green-scaled female, small, bright-eyed, with a crooked horn that gave her a permanently quizzical expression, took to perching on the ledge directly above Marin's sleeping quarters. She arrived before dawn each morning and waited, her tail wrapped neatly around her hind legs, her head cocked at the angle that Tallies had catalogued as attentive interest. When Marin emerged, the yearling produced a sound, a 2-note ascending phrase, bright and clear, that was unmistakably a greeting. Marin greeted her back every morning with a wave and a hum. By the end of the first week, the yearling was answering the hum. By the second week, she was harmonizing with it. Tallies named the yearling Quill in his notebooks, after the crooked horn. It was an unprofessional habit for a behavioral observer. He did it anyway. Marin spent her mornings with the Deep Mother, not performing, existing. She would sit on the obsidian slab, lean against the dragon's foreleg, and hum whatever came to mind. Sometimes the root song's foundational note, sometimes a dock shanty from Thresk that her mother had taught her before she died, sometimes nothing recognizable at all, just sound, exploratory and loose, the way a child hums while drawing or thinking about dinner. The crown sent its diplomat on the 5th day. Her name was Sareth Mal, and she arrived at the valley's northern pass with a staff of 2, no instruments, and a letter from the Lord Chancellor that began with the phrase, further to Envoy Dahl's objections, which told Marin's father that Ketch's diplomatic alternative to arson had been received, and against all probability, taken seriously. Sareth spent her first day watching. She did not approach the hearth stone. She did not request an audience with the council. She sat on the envoy's tower ledge with a cup of tea and watched the morning session, Marin humming, the Deep Mother answering, the yearlings gathering, and said nothing until the session ended and Marin came back for lunch. "You're the voice anchor," Sareth said. "That's what they call me." "And what do you call yourself?" Marin thought about this. "Marin," she said. Sareth almost smiled. It was the right answer and they both knew it. The diplomat stayed for a week, attended 3 council sessions as a silent observer, and returned to the crown with a report that Ketch later obtained through channels. It read, in part, "The bond between the human child and the Deep Mother is not a diplomatic relationship. It is a structural one. The child's voice is load-bearing. Recommend the crown's posture shift from strategic oversight to logistical support. Ensure the child has what she needs. Remove obstacles and otherwise stay out of the way." The Lord Chancellor's marginal note in red ink, unprecedented. Approved. The Deep Mother listened to all of it, the sessions, the politics, the distant maneuvering of institutions trying to classify something that didn't fit their categories. Her amber eyes would track the melody, and sometimes when Marin hit a particular phrase or interval the dragon would answer. A bass note that turned the shanty into a duet. A harmonic that resolved a melody Marin hadn't known was unresolved. The music they made together was not composed. It was conversational, call and response. 2 creatures from different scales of existence, finding a shared language in the space between their voices. The younger dragons began landing near the hearth stone during these morning sessions. They didn't approach. They roosted on the monolith's shoulders, on the bridges and ledges within earshot, and they listened. Some of them tried to join. Their voices were untrained, they'd grown up singing fragments, the degraded remnants of a song they'd never heard complete, and their first attempts were rough, dissonant, off-key in ways that made Erie wince. Marin didn't wince, she adjusted. She shifted her pitch to accommodate the yearling voices, finding harmonics that bridged the gap between their imperfect tones and the root song structure. She didn't teach them. She gave them something to tune to, a reference point, an anchor. Within a week, the morning sessions had grown from Marin and the Deep Mother to Marin and the Deep Mother and 40 yearlings. Within 2 weeks, the number doubled. The sessions developed their own structure, not planned, not directed, but organic, the way a garden develops structure when the soil and the water are right. Marin would begin with the anchor note, the Deep Mother would answer with the bass foundation, and the yearlings would layer their voices on top, each one finding its frequency, each one filling a gap in the chord. Some mornings, the song went places Marin didn't expect. A yearling would produce a phrase that triggered an answering phrase from the Deep Mother, something ancient, something from the original composition, and the root song would expand in real time, revealing sections that had been lost for centuries, melodies that no living dragon had ever heard. In those moments, Erie would lean forward on the hearthstone's summit, her crystalline horns catching the light, her ancient eyes burning with the particular intensity of a scholar who has spent her life studying fragments and is finally hearing the complete text. By the end of the month, the daily singing at the hearthstone involved more than 300 dragons, and the root song was stronger than it had been in centuries. Old Tessara came down from the southern cliffs on the 12th day. She had not left her ledge in years. Her joints were stiff, her clouded eye saw only shapes, and the descent was painful. But she made it to the hearthstone, lowered herself onto the obsidian with a creaking sigh that made the hatchling scatter, and added her voice to the song. It was the strongest bass note in the valley apart from the Deep Mother's own, and when it joined the chord, Marin felt the root song stabilize in a way it hadn't before, the foundation deepening, the harmonics locking, the whole structure gaining a solidity that said this is permanent now. Tessara looked at Marin with her one good eye. The amber was dim, age-fogged, but the expression in it was clear. "Worth the climb, old girl," it said, "worth the wait." Erie came to Marin one afternoon as the singing wound down and the yearlings dispersed. The ancient dragon settled at the edge of the obsidian, where Marin was stretching her legs and eating an apple. "The old texts describe the voice anchor bond," Erie said. "They say it cannot be manufactured. It is not a treaty, not a contract. It is a resonance, 2 frequencies that were always meant to harmonize, finding each other across whatever distance or time separates them." Marin took a bite of her apple. Is that why the Deep Mother composed the song with the note missing? She knew someone would come. She believed someone would come. Belief and knowledge are not the same thing. She composed the note on faith, and then she slept for 600 years, waiting for faith to be justified. That's a long time to wait. Not for a dragon. For a dragon, 600 years is a held breath. The exhalation is what matters. Erie's amber eyes were soft. "You are the exhalation, child." Marin considered this. She was 10. She understood exhalation. She understood held breath. She understood waiting for something without knowing what it was. She'd done it every night for 2 years after her mother died, lying in the bunk on her father's ship, listening for a sound she couldn't name and wouldn't hear. The dock in Thresk creaking in the dark, the water lapping against the hull, the absence of a voice that should have been humming in the galley. She had found the sound here. Not her mother's voice, nothing could replace that. But the root song, the Deep Mother's heartbeat, the harmony that formed between her hum and the dragon's bass note, it filled the same place. The place where something vast and warm should be, the place that had been empty since the night her mother stopped breathing. "Erie," she said, "what happens when I leave?" "You don't have to leave. My dad's posting ends in 4 months. The crown will send a new envoy. We'll go back to Thresk. Iri was quiet for a long time. The Deep Mother's breathing filled the silence, vast, slow, steady, each exhalation carrying the faint remnant of the root song's bass note. The song does not require your constant presence, Iri said finally. It requires your existence. The note you provide is not produced by your throat alone. It is produced by the fact of you, by the frequency that a human consciousness contributes to the chord simply by being alive and attentive. You could be in Thresk. You could be anywhere. As long as you are in the world, the note exists. But the morning sessions. The yearlings have learned the reference pitch. They are already teaching the hatchlings. That young green one, the one with the crooked horn who waits on your ledge, she can sustain the anchor note for 30 seconds now. 3 weeks ago she couldn't hold it for 5. In a generation, every dragon in this valley will carry the full root song, and the Deep Mother will not need an anchor to stay awake. Iri paused. You did not come here to stay forever. You came here to start something. And you have. Maren looked at the Deep Mother. The great dragon's eye was open, the amber warm, steady, focused on the child with what Maren had come to think of as the dragon's version of a smile. Not a movement of the mouth, a quality of the light, a warmth in the amber that said, I see you, I know you. You are the note I waited for, and I will hear you from any distance. Maren put her hand on the dragon's snout. The scales were warm. The heartbeat was steady. Behind her, up on the envoy's tower ledge, she knew her father was watching. She knew Ketch was drafting reports and Tallies was filling notebooks, and the crown was sending diplomats who might or might not understand what they were walking into. She knew the world outside the valley would want to classify this, contain it, study it, turn it into something manageable and strategic and small. She also knew it wouldn't work. You can't contain a heartbeat. You can't classify a song. You can put frameworks around treaties and protocols around alliances, but you can't put a framework around the sound a 10-year-old girl makes when she hums to a dragon, and you can't classify the look in the dragon's eye when it hears the note it waited 600 years to hear. The vibration that passed between them, the root song's anchor note, hummed through skin and scale and bone, was not a farewell. It was a promise. The kind that doesn't need words because it's written in the frequency of 2 lives that found each other across 6 centuries of silence. I'll come back, Maren said. She didn't say it as a promise or a declaration. She said it the way you say something that is simply true, the way you say the sun will rise or the tide will turn, not because you're brave enough to promise it, but because you can't imagine the alternative. The Deep Mother exhaled. The breath was warm and carried the scent of deep stone and ancient springs, and the faint, sweet chemical trace of dragonfire, not the destructive kind, not the kind that turned stone to slag, but the metabolic fire that powered the Deep Mother's heartbeat, the slow burn that kept the valley alive. The amber eye brightened, and the sound the dragon made, low, resonant, sustained, was not a word in any language. It was the note, their note, the one that completed the chord. Maren hummed it back. Around them the valley sang. 1,000 voices in 1,000 registers, from the sub-bass of the elders to the bright trills of the yearlings to the tentative first notes of hatchlings who had never known a world without the root song. The mountains resonated. The thermal vents steamed in the bright afternoon sun. The hot springs bubbled. The air smelled of mineral warmth and the particular cleanness that comes after something ancient wakes up and breathes. Bren watched from the envoy's tower ledge. He had closed his journal. There was nothing left to translate. The sound rising from the valley was not language. It was something that existed before language, and would exist after it. The thing that connected a sleeping dragon to a waking child, a held breath to an answered note, a 600-year silence to a 10-year-old hum. He thought about his report to the crown, 3 sentences. The root song requires a human voice to complete it. The Deep Mother chose a child. Recommend we listen. He thought about what Ketch had said that first day, she's 10, and what Sarath Mal had written in her report, The child's voice is load-bearing, and what the Lord Chancellor had scrawled in the margin, unprecedented, approved. He thought about how the most powerful institutions in the world had spent centuries building frameworks for managing dragons, treaties, protocols, strategic assessments, jurisdictional hierarchies, and how all of it, every page and every clause, had been rendered irrelevant by a 10-year-old girl who sat down on a stone floor and hummed. Not because she was special, not because she carried some ancient destiny or hidden power, because she paid attention, because she heard a sound no one else was listening for, and she answered it without wanting anything in return, because she was a child, and children haven't yet learned to put conditions on their curiosity. He thought about Marin's mother, about the dock shanties and the morning watch and the way she told their daughter once, while stirring soup in the galley of their cramped boat in Thresk, that the most important thing you could do for another living creature was pay attention to it, not study it, not classify it, not build a framework around it. Just pay attention without an agenda, without wanting anything back, and see what happens. What happens, Bren thought, is a valley sings again. He put down his pen. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in 7 years of translation work, Bren Dahl stopped trying to find words for things and simply listened to the sound of a valley remembering how to sing.